What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, you know what time it is. We're going through the top 5 buy low targets as we head into week 11. I'm a little bit under the weather, but that's not going to hold me back. We're going to get through all of these targets. But before I do, make sure you're following both Nick and I on Twitter. That's going to be your best bet on a way to get in contact with us. Maybe you have some questions on start and sits, maybe some trade questions. Hit us up on Twitter. We have way too many questions in the comment section to be able to answer, but on Twitter we have more of an opportunity to get in touch with you guys. Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals, and Boyd is simply one of the best buy low candidates that there is this week because why? A lot of people got burnt by him, and whenever a player burns a ton of people, there is a lot of resentment in the fantasy community. I know personally because I'm getting these questions on Twitter and I've been fielding a ton of them on what people should do with Boyd. I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious. If you own him, you should be thrilled and definitely don't trade him away. And if you don't own him, you should trade for him. He still has a ton of value. It shouldn't be super hard to land him. He matched his season low in both receptions and targets while also facing the New Orleans Saints, a team that has been giving it up to the wide receiver position all season long. So yes, this was a game he should have done spectacularly in, and he failed. And the thing was, Boyd even looked good at the beginning of the game. He caught like a 20-yard pass right out of the gate, but then overall, the offense took a nosedive and the rest was history. So that's going to happen from game to game, and when you're dealing with Andy Dalton, who is wildly inconsistent to begin with, these games are going to happen more oftentimes than not. But Boyd's still a really great player. Next week they face the Ravens, which obviously sounds like a nightmare matchup on paper, but remember, this Baltimore defense hasn't really looked that good recently, and the fact that it's divisional does mean that there's a higher risk of anything potentially happen. So it's possible Boyd still has a good game. And while we know that, most typical Boyd owners are going to see the bad game in a really good matchup against New Orleans, and then they're going to see that they play Baltimore this week, and they're going to want to unload him to the highest bidder, and that bidder should be you. Why? Because Boyd should easily lead this team in targets for the remainder of the season. AJ Green's status is still up in the air. And as for this Bengals defense, they allow for a ton of yards. And what that means is that every game is more than likely going to be a pass-heavy game script when they're coming from behind. And just because he had one bad game, don't let that scare you off. Boyd's a baller and he should be treated like one. Go ahead and send out an offer for him. See what you can get. The next player on this list I also feel really good about, and that is Larry Fitzgerald of the Arizona Cardinals. And I know a lot of you may not think that you can necessarily buy low on him because he has had 3 double-digit performances in a row, but his most recent performance was a 6 for 50, 11-point performance in PPR formats, which if you guys don't know, 11 points in PPR is really not impressive. In fact, 37 wide receivers are averaging over 11 PPR fantasy points this year alone. So an 11-point performance that's outside the wide receiver 3 range. So even though he didn't dud, he still makes for an amazing targets. And there are a few reasons why. I do believe that mainly because the coaching change happened, that's going to continue to help improve this offense. We're seeing players on this team being used for their strengths, and unlike earlier in the season, they are actually moving the ball. So it's an amazing sign for this offense and the potential for this team to score more points. And so far, Larry Fitzgerald has received no fewer than 8 targets over the past 4 games and is averaging 9.5 targets per game over the last 4 contests. So he basically has everything that you're looking for. He's got the volume, he has an offense that's trending upward, and for a receiver like Larry, who has the combination of great hands and shallow routes, 9.5 targets per game is all you're really going to need. And he also plays a lot better at home and should be in line for a big game at home against Oakland this week. The next player on this list is the only running back, and that's Dion Lewis of the Tennessee Titans. I know that you guys have heard us say it before, but in fantasy football, there are only a few real predictors of fantasy points, and those are oftentimes volume and air yards. Dion Lewis, at this point in the season, is an actual workhorse running back. He's averaged over 20 touches per game over the past 3 games, and this team overall looks to be trending upward as well. Similarly to what I said about Fitz, the same goes for the Tennessee Titans. The good news is though, Derrick Henry, he ended up scoring both of the touchdowns on the ground, which in turn made Dion Lewis have a very poor fantasy point performance. And for that reason alone, that's the only reason that you can potentially end up landing Dion Lewis right now, because if he did score both of those touchdowns, you better believe you would have absolutely no shot of landing him this week. In fact, since week 7, Dion Lewis ranks 7th in overall rushing grade per Pro Football Focus, 7th in elusiveness rating, and 16th in breakaway percentage, and he's had the 9th most snaps and the 10th most attempts, along with the 10th most yards after contact per attempt. So everything here, when it comes to volume and efficiency, screams he is a back-end RB1, and I do not think you even need to pay close to that. I think you can pay solid RB2 numbers and land him this week. Nobody trusts him. He's screwed a lot of people over for the first half of the season, and honestly, the offense really hasn't been that good up until recently, so a lot of people just don't trust it. Me personally, I try to packaging in a struggling running back, someone with a little bit of name value, then add a solid wide receiver as well on top of that. Some of the examples of running backs I'd try to ship off would be someone like Kenyon Drake, Alex Collins, maybe Jordan Howard or Lamar Miller. Some of those guys to try to package in to get Dion Lewis. But that's what I'd do. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section on what you would do. But the show must go on. The next wide receiver target we have is Mike Evans. And I think we all can mostly agree on the first 3 that I went over, but Mike Evans, I believe, is going to be a little bit more controversial. And the reason is because a lot of people still hold on to the name value a little bit higher than his production has been on the season. And we all know, as fantasy football players, when it comes to getting max value, you never want to target a player with super high name value. It's usually best to target the player with similar production with less name value, because what ends up happening, we end up just paying more for the name than we do the production itself. That's not to say that sometimes you can't get a good value on bigger name players, and that's exactly why this time I believe it's a good time to target Mike Evans, because don't get me wrong, I don't want you to pay a ton for him. If people are asking too much, you just don't buy him. In his playoff schedule, while there are a lot of exploitable matchups, it's not necessarily the easiest, but for those of you who need to win right now, those of you who may not make the playoffs, if you don't win 2 out of the next 3 games, Mike Evans could be that guy to help you get there. He plays the Giants, then has a 3-game home stretch of San Francisco, Carolina, and New Orleans, who have all been getting crushed through the air recently. And Mike Evans, he's the type of player that can help you win your week. Unfortunately, though, the past 2 weeks he has only compiled just 4 receptions for 67 yards total. And when I say total, I don't mean that was just the past 1 week. No, that was 2 weeks combined, which, if I'm being frank, that's pitiful, but that's the reason why you can buy low on Mike Evans. Even after his super hot start, he's still only the wide receiver 12 on the season, and several times this year he has had duds thrown in there or sprinkled here and there. But the only difference between him and some of the other receivers in this range is that he has the ability to just completely go off. And when you have Ryan Fitzpatrick heating up and you have this offense moving the ball with ease, Mike Evans has the ability to have these monstrous games. And we haven't really seen it the past 2 weeks, but they did put up over 400 passing yards. And if you tell me heading into the game that I'm going to own a receiver on a team that's going to throw for over 400, I'm going to be super excited every time. Now, it didn't work out obviously for Mike Evans, but that's good, because that's how you can take advantage of it and potentially get him on your team. So target Mike Evans. He should still be considered a back-end wide receiver 1 with high-end wide receiver 1 upside any given week. So see what you can offer out there for him and see if you can land him on your team. The final player on this list is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I don't believe there is a single player in the league right now that lost as many people money as Marquez Valdes-Scantling did. So I believe that he is the most hated player heading into this week, and that's why you should target him. Everyone and their mother has been talking him up about how he's going to have a monster game. We have both Geronimo Allison and Randall Cobb injured, which seemed like a recipe for a massive fantasy game. But that actually just didn't happen, and he finished the game with just 6 receptions for 44 yards. In PPR leagues, that's 10.4 fantasy points, but compared to what the expectations were and how high the ownership percentages were, there were a lot of people that were being really disappointed by him. And yes, the 6 receptions is nice, but if you look back at what he was able to do the 3 games before this, he was averaging 31 yards per reception over the past 3 contests, and to drop all the way down to 7.3, that is super disappointing. To put that into perspective, if he had his regular yards per reception average in this game, those 6 receptions would have been good for 180 yards, and you give me that, I don't care if you get a touchdown or not. Obviously it didn't work out, but to me, when everyone gets emotional, that's when I like to throw out the offers. So simply put, the best course of action is going to be to capitalize on the recency bias and trade for Valdes-Scantling this week. He has really positive matchups to finish the season, including Atlanta, Chicago, and Seattle, who are all bottom half pass defenses when it comes to allowing fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Also, Randall Cobb and Allison have not proven to us that they can even stay healthy, so there will be more opportunities for him to be one of the main guys like he was this week. And hey, he even played better while some of these other guys were on the field, so maybe them being on the field will continue to open up more opportunities for him, even if that comes at the expense of less targets, which either way it happens, there is a bright future away for Valdes-Scantling, and especially this season, he has the ability to win some people some matchups. I would be extremely happy if I could land Scantling, especially if I was a wide receiver needy team, because he's an extremely talented rookie who has immense big play potential. So send out an offer, see what you can do. But that's going to do it for this week's video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.